Make way for Mr. Speaker.
I invite the Minister of State for Infrastructure and Transit to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to read from I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. Thank you.
Introductions by members. Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone in this House knows how much we rely on our administrative staff to keep ourselves and the business of this House running smoothly, sometimes. They help ensure we have the right set of notes for debates. They help us get the votes on time. And more recently, they help us zoom into the right virtual room. For 35 years, Connie Roberts has done this extraordinarily well. Through changes in party, through changes in technology, she's done the job with grace, conscientiousness, and poise. Right out of high school, Connie was hired, and it was then the Ministry of Deregulation in 1979, and then the following year moved over to the Legislature. She knows everybody, Mr. Speaker. For example, my predecessor in Oak Bay Gordon Head is Brian Smith. He served between 1979 and 1989, not that long ago. And he comes in from time to time, and of course, Connie and he carry on like a house on fire, like old friends. In 1991, Connie left government to raise two wonderful children, Victoria Roberts, who lives in Kelowna, and David Roberts, who lives in Grand Prairie, Alberta. In total, she's worked, if you can believe it, for 15 ministers in 11 portfolios. And today I count myself incredibly fortunate to have Connie as my administrative coordinator. She exemplifies what's best in public service. Connie, I look forward to applauding you this evening in Long Service Awards ceremony at Government House. Would everyone please join me in giving Connie a round of applause in this house as well.
Member for Cariboo North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This week we celebrate Small Business Week across British Columbia, and I'm very pleased today joining us in the gallery is the President of the Quesnel and District Chamber of Commerce, a very strong advocacy group for businesses in our region. Rick Whitner is also, so the President of the Quesnel and District Chamber of Commerce is also the President of the Cariboo Mining Association. Mining is a critically important industry in our region. He's here to meet with government to discuss this important industry, and he's also joined for another member on the association, Jackie Sargentson. Would the House please welcome these members to the House?
Minister of Post-Secondary Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Attending QP today is a number of students from the Alliance of BC Students. They are here on the legislative grounds meeting with various ministers and MLAs to talk about the issues that matter most to them. They'll be here today and tomorrow, and I want to invite the House to please give them all a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Somebody who we are very familiar with, Jason Gwertzen, is here in the chamber. He often looks over us. He is the spiritual care provider for Leading Influence. He has brought in today a constituent of mine, Lydia Haight. Lydia is retiring from Pacific Christian School after 20 years of clerical work. Her first order of business, I am told, in retirement, is taking it to the streets at the Doobie Brothers concert in Abbotsford on October the 28th with her husband, Paul. Huge congratulations for an exciting retirement.
Member for Abbotsford South.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think every single MLA in this House would agree that we would be nothing if it were not for our dedicated staff of CAs back in our office. They handle probably the most difficult phone conversations, the most difficult casework, and they are the ones that actually do the bulk of the heavy lifting on our behalf and on behalf of our constituents and on British Columbians. It is my pleasure to introduce two of my staff that are up in the gallery, Amber Lee Bourne and Teresa Mezek, and Amber is joined by her partner Chris. Would this House please give them a very warm welcome and an applause for all the hard work that they do every day.
Official Opposition House Leader.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure on behalf of the official opposition to welcome to the Legislature for the next couple of days and here in the Chamber today constituency assistants from all over British Columbia. We won't name them one by one, but we have constituency assistants here from Kelowna, Vancouver, Prince George, White Rock, Williams Lake, all over this great province of ours. And as everyone in this House knows, regardless of the member, it's the constituency assistants, it's the staff and the team back home that do the real heavy lifting on behalf of all members. They run our community offices, they manage tough files. Most importantly, they're the ones on the front lines that provide exceptional service to people in need. So on behalf of all of the members of the opposition, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for the incredible work that you do as the face and the voice of the MLAs you represent. And we want to welcome you here for a couple of days of engagement and collaboration. And I would ask the House to please make all of these incredible men and women, these constituency assistants for the official opposition, very, very welcome here in British Columbia's legislature today.
Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome to the Chamber today three new and relatively new members of my Ministry Office staff. Alyssa Dunlop is my admin assistant and joined us last spring. She is the person who gets to field numerous phone calls, many of them not particularly pleased with my actions, and manage expectations and give people good answers. Shibby Clare joined us this summer as a new admin coordinator and has been working tirelessly to keep the many parts of the schedule that are fluid running smoothly. And Mary Ward joined us just this week as my new executive assistant and experienced her first scrum yesterday, having my back. Will the House make them all very, very welcome? Thank you very much.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Member for Peace River North.
Yeah, thanks, Honourable Speaker. Today I rise in the House on International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. The observance of this day can be tracked back to October 17th, 1987, when over 100,000 people gathered in Paris, at the very site where the UN Declaration of Human Rights was signed to honour the victims of extreme poverty, violence, and hunger. On that day, they proclaimed that poverty is a violation of human rights and that action must be taken to eradicate poverty worldwide. This year's theme is putting dignity in practice, calling on universal access for decent work and social protection. Decent work must empower people, provide fair wages, as well as safe working conditions. Today, we reflect on the progress that has been made to reduce poverty here in British Columbia. Yet we cannot turn a blind eye to the harsh reality that still persists today, especially within our affordability crisis. British Columbia has the highest rate and the highest seniors poverty rate in the country, the second highest overall poverty rate in the country. Today, 1 in 5 children in British Columbia grow up in poverty. We have a lot of work to do in British Columbia to give British Columbians a better future. We must build a prosperous economy that creates good-paying jobs across the province, and we have to invest in our social services to help support individuals and families in need. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the many, many charities that are across all of our communities in the province, the nonprofits, and all the people that work so hard to lift up our communities. We must continue to support these organizations and stand together to eradicate poverty here in British Columbia as well as around the globe. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Vernon-Monashee.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Today I rise with immense pride and excitement as we celebrate Small Businesses Week from October 15th to October 21st. It is a time to honour the backbone of our economy, the driving force behind our community's resilience and growth, our small businesses. I have the honour to know many great small business owners, to visit many businesses regularly, whether it is personally delivering COVID-19 relief or circuit breaker grant or recently small business rebate program information, or to go there to hear their concerns, as well as a customer to support local small businesses along with my family. I had the incredible honor and privilege to showcasing some of our beloved businesses to our Premier during his recent visit to Vernon last month. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Calico Clothing, the Veg Cheesery, Good, Gracious and Practical Kitchen, Oopsie Daisy, the Town Theatre, Ratio Coffee and Pastry, for graciously hosting us. I recently joined celebrating 20th anniversary of the Rusty Spur, a cherished family-owned business operated tack and supply store in Lumbee. Stuart and Andrea, your commitment to excellent customer service and extensive knowledge in serving our agriculture sector is commendable. Your generosity in supporting charities and nonprofit is truly heartwarming. Your contribution not only strengthens our community fabric, but it also inspires us to others to give back. Later this month, Greater Vernon Chamber will be honoring entrepreneurs and business community with Business Excellence Awards on October 26. I urge everyone to join me celebrating our small businesses, not just this week, but also throughout the week. Visit your local stores, dine in your neighborhood restaurant, and support the entrepreneurs who pour their hearts and soul into making our communities vibrant and thriving. Thank you.
Member for Richmond North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise to speak about one of BC's best-kept secrets, the BC Aviation Museum, which has been around for over 30 years. Earlier this summer in August, I met with the fantastic team of staff and volunteers at the BC Aviation Museum who worked hard to preserve the 37 aircraft, dozens of displays, and over 13,000 artifacts. I would like to thank Steve Nicol, president of the museum, for taking 2 hours of his day to tour the museum and detail its rich history. Started by dedicated volunteers in the late 1980s, the museum is now under professional management as they plan a major upgrade to their displays, education program, and visitor experience. From the first Canadian-designed aircraft to fly in Canada out of Victoria in 1910 to a Cold War supersonic CF-104 fighter, the museum displays over 100 years of aviation history in British Columbia, all of which I was truly grateful to experience with Mr. Nicol during my visit. Unfortunately, today, the museum is running out of space and needs help. It is planning a new wildfire-themed hangar to house its 2 fire bombers and hopefully its iconic Mighty Martin Mars water bombers, along with many other displays. This is a huge undertaking, technically, operationally, and financially. Until now, the museum depended solely on ticket sales, donations, and the generosity of the Victoria International Airport. Support for the museum will be greatly appreciated and will help give Victoria another world-class tourist attraction. Members, I encourage you all to take some time to stop by the BC Aviation Museum and celebrate the impact it has had on all of us. I certainly have a blast, and I'm sure you will too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Langford, Juan de Fuca.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's all fair to say that cancer impacts every family in British Columbia. It impacts all of our lives as legislators as well. And I'm so thankful to everyone each year who participate in different fundraising events, whether it was our Minister of Post-Secondary Education or members of the opposition who participate in Movember. I also want to take an opportunity to acknowledge one event that happens here on Vancouver Island each year, and that's the Tour de Rock. Beginning in 1997, one police officer with a vision has led to a charity cycling event where police officers and emergency service personnel cycle Vancouver Island. Starting in the North Island and riding down the south, they raise money for pediatric cancer research and support programs like Camp Good Times. 1,200 kilometers over a 2-week ride. Since 1997, Tour de Rock has raised $52 million here for BC Cancer. Tour de Rock, for me, is a testament to the power of community engagement. From local businesses to schools, the whole community in every small town comes together to support this cause. Tour de Rock plays a crucial role in raising awareness about pediatric cancer and the challenges faced by so many families across our country and around the world. This year, I was particularly proud in the community of Langford Juan de Fuca to be able to help celebrate 5 West Shore RCMP riders, and I want to acknowledge them in this House. Constable Mason Harrison, Chris Valentine, Scott Haight, Justin Raycraft, Rusty Olson, and while they're not a member of the West Shore RCMP, they're a proud member of the Saanich Police. I also want to acknowledge one of my constituents, Sonna Brainbridge, all who have been able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for their communities respectively, and have been such strong role models for their junior riders as well. I had a chance to talk to many of them about the long, difficult, and emotional ride that this has been, but every bit helped, and I want to thank all the communities that helped raise well over $1 million. They ended their ride here at the Legislature on October 6th, where they raised, and I quote, $1,027,559.46. I hope the House will join me in congratulating and thanking all of the riders and everyone who participated.
Member for Delta South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to celebrate the incredible success of a local business in my riding that recently brought the community of Delta together with their first annual Barnside Harvest Music Festival. Barnside Brewing is a local craft brewery, and what makes Barnside unique is that its ownership consists of 4 local farming families whose roots in the community date back to 1899. Their beer is proudly made from ingredients grown on the farm right here in my riding of Delta South. This farm-to-table model is achieved through strong collaborations with farmers across our community. It took a lot of work between Delta Council, the Harris family, and the farming community to put the dream together, but many years later, Barnside Brewing is thriving. This year, Barnside wanted to give back to the community. They worked with a local festival organizer to organize a unique music festival at historic Patterson Park in Ladner. Though it has sat empty for many decades, Patterson Park was once the site of magnificent standardbred horse racing. Well, fast forward, and Patterson Park was once again full of life as an entertainment hub this summer. Once more, thousands of people flocked to the former racetrack, except this time, instead of horses, it was to watch the musical performances. When the folks at Barnside first thought of the idea for a music festival, they asked the city for permission to sell 5,000 tickets per day. However, by the time the event took place, they had sold over 10,000 tickets for the Friday night and over 12,000 tickets for Saturday. Local performers such as 5440, Warren Dean Flandes graced us with their musical talent. Other incredible Canadian acts such as the Sheepdogs, Chad Brownlee, and the Roadhammers helped ensure the weekend was one we would never forget. Afterwards, locals praised the event, with many saying that in all the years of living in Delta, this festival was the best thing to ever happen in our community. So hats off to Barnside, to all the staff and volunteers who worked tirelessly to put this event together, and to all the vendors selling fresh local produce, merchandise, and of course, farm fresh beer, whose efforts helped to make this event truly unforgettable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Usually, Mr. Speaker, I'll use this time to talk about people or events in my community, but today I'm going to talk about a little bit of a more boring topic, legislation. And but it's something that affects each and every one of us in this province. And it's something that we do here almost all day in the legislature. We introduce, debate, and pass new bills which become law. And those bills are typically tabled by ministers. You probably won't see bills tabled and passed by private members, as there isn't really a process to do that in our legislature. And it's been that way in British Columbia since the beginning in 1871. But recently, the Special Committee to Review Private Members' Business made recommendations to change this, to allow private member bills to move through the legislative process, similar to what currently exists in Alberta, Ontario, and the House of Commons. Private members' bills are a little bit different than regular bills in that they can't have a financial impact, but they can have a meaningful impact. In other parliaments around the world, private members' bills have introduced significant social reforms, including legalizing same-sex marriage and abolishing capital punishment. In Canada, the Non-Smokers' Health Act was passed in 1986 as a private member's bill, which banned smoking in the workplace. But even if private members' bill doesn't pass, debating them can and has elevated important ideas and can lead to positive change. I believe, in my heart, that good ideas come from all of us, each and every one of us, and I look forward to where we go to from here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members?
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the NDP's out-of-control taxes and record-breaking inflationary deficits are driving the cost of living to unbearable heights and trapping families in their new normal of an NDP middle-class squeeze. With mortgage rates at their highest point in 2 decades, James Sloan Minshall and his husband are being forced out of their home. Their mortgage payments have increased by 60%, sending them back into the rental market. James says, quote, "Everything has changed, from the grocery habits to the food my dog eats," end quotes. And he's going back into a rental market at his highest rents in Canada. When will the Premier stop his out-of-control spending and record-breaking inflationary deficits that are breaking the backs of middle-class families like James and his husband?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And actually, there's a bit of good news for the member today. Inflation in Canada is down to 3.8%, but in BC it's actually down to 3.3%, which is good news. So we're definitely hoping that the Bank of Canada won't be raising the interest rates, because as things continue to go down, groceries are going down a bit, not as much as they should, but the member's right. Middle-class families are facing real challenges, and we need to do more to help them. And we're doing a lot, but we need to do more. So we're trying to take the pressure off of those middle-income families, where instead of cutting taxes for people at the top of the wage range, we're actually reducing costs for people. And we're going to keep doing that to keep helping people, just like the very person that the members mentioned.
Kamloops North Thompson, supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Several economists now are warning that NDP policies are going to directly result in the shrinking of the economy back by a decade and impact people $5,000 per year per person in this province. No amount of empty NDP promises can give James and his family their home back. Instead of helping families, the Premier's NDP government has introduced 29 new or increased taxes since 2017. They've doubled the debt in 6 years and racked up the largest inflationary deficit in BC's history. James puts it bluntly, and he quote, "It gets too much to be able to afford to eat and pay all of my bills, with vehicles, with gas, with mortgage payments," end quote. Like so many others, James is a direct casualty of the NDP's middle-class squeeze. So again, how much longer will BC families get squeezed for housing, gas, and groceries under this NDP government?
Minister of Finance.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do want to point out, to remind the member that there is an issue with the global economy, and we've been raising to deal with just that. The member raises cost of insurance for vehicles. We actually lowered the rate for ICBC costs for every person in the province at a certain, for the base rates. We are building more homes for middle-income people. I think it's odd that the member opposite doesn't see that the inflation in BC is actually good news. It's good news for people in this province. And we're going to continue to provide services to people. One of the taxes that he's mentioned is the speculation tax. And the speculation tax has actually put more housing on the market, more housing ever. I mean, I could go on, Mr. Speaker, because there's a number of things that we have done for middle-income people, and I'm looking forward to more questions to be able to address them.
Campbell's North Thompson, second supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's shocking that we have a finance minister that says inflation is good news for people in British Columbia, that they should be thankful. Only this government that likes to point fingers at everybody else thinks that inflation is good news. Mr. Speaker, for months after month after month, BC outstripped the national average with inflation. They have 1 month where they're a little bit below and everyone's supposed to be happy. Mr. Speaker, that is indicative of this government. When can people expect real change from this government to bring down the inflationary costs that they are feeling in their homes on a permanent basis, not a 1 month blip on the record?
Minister of Finance.
I need to remind the member that as a provincial government, we do not bring down inflation. That's a federal government, and it's a global issue as well. But we are doing things much more than the members opposite ever did when they were in government. We brought in the BC Family Benefit, and we boosted it this year permanently. And I wonder if the member opposite, is that something that they would cut? We brought in a child care program that is putting up to $900 a month back into people's pockets. Is that something that the members opposite would cut, like they did when they formed government in 2001? No, yes. We're supporting families with meals programs in schools right across the province. Is that something that they would cut? Because we know it's helping families. The affordability credit put over $1,000 back into people's pockets. The hydro credit put $100 back into people's pockets. You have to ask, is that something that they would cut? And we are, they're muttering, Speaker, because I think that they doth protest too much. But, we've capped rental increases below the inflation rate because we recognize that that needs to happen in this province. Is that something else that they would repeal?
Member for Prince George Mackenzie.
Thank you, Speaker. The lawsuit and mess in Surrey represents a total failure of leadership by the Premier. And let me emphasize that it's a mess that's been caused by the NDP, putting politics before the public good and leaving taxpayers to clean up the mess. We need to restore transparency, respect for taxpayers, and local autonomy to the process. The government can start that today by releasing the unredacted report on the Surrey police transition instead of hiding behind 500 pages of redacted policing report. Will the Premier release the report, the full report, today?
Minister, you want to sit down and answer? No. Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member. First, the only issue around the transition has been the delay caused by the City of Surrey. They have now gone to court to try and have a review done of the decision that was been made. Legislation has been tabled in the House that will ensure that the decision to proceed with the transition to the Surrey Police Service will continue. And as for the redacted information that the member talks about, the member knows full well that that is not provincial information, that is RCMP information, and that relates to specific confidential RCMP staffing, vacancy rates, all of those kinds of things, and it is up to them to decide whether that should be released or not, and the member knows that. So the answer would be no.
Prince George Mackenzie supplemental.
Thank you, Speaker. I find it ridiculous that the Premier or the Minister to stand there and with the introduction of the bill to ask the BC United to bail the NDP out of the mess that they've made. The foundation for this transition was flawed right from the beginning, and it's NDP's indecision and politics that got us to where we are here today. It doesn't matter what shoulder patch an officer wears. The Premier's soft on crime policies and his catch and release system, justice system, will continue to fail Surrey residents and the people of BC. We need to restore the trust and the transparency. Will the Minister release the full 500 pages of his redacted Surrey policing report today?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And if there's one thing that I will not be asking the opposition to do, is to bail the government out, because frankly there's no need to bail out what is the right decision, which, Honourable Speaker, I would remind that member, 3 former Solicitor Generals, all from his party, said the decision that I made on behalf in terms of continuing the transition to the Surrey Police Service was the right one. And, Honourable Speaker, as I said and repeat again, that member knows full well that the redacted information is confidential RCMP information, which I am not allowed to release unless they were to say so. And the member knows that. So, Honourable Speaker, Surrey is doing its thing. We have legislation in this House. The transition to the Surrey Police Service will continue.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. For over a decade, post-secondary institutions in our province have been over-reliant on international students' tuitions. These fees are not protected by the tuition limit policy, which means undergraduate international students pay 426% more than domestic students. We heard from international students who rely on food banks because they can't afford to eat. This government repeatedly stresses the need to recruit and retain international students to contribute to the workforce and the economy. On the one hand, we say we value international students. On the other hand, they are exploited for their tuition, and we hear directly from them that they don't get the supports they need to succeed. Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Post-Secondary Education, BC is becoming known as a jurisdiction that takes advantage of international students. Is this the reputation we want?
Minister of Post-Secondary Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for this very important question. We do welcome international students to our province. They're an important part of our educational system. And we do, and I too have heard many of the stories that I know that the member is referring to. And it is for that reason that we are putting together an international student framework that we'll be able to share in the next number of months as we're putting it together. But I also want to acknowledge, and I think it's really important, Mr. Speaker, to acknowledge that we recognize that the model and the system has not been working as well as it should, and I look forward to sharing with the member the framework that we're putting in place.
Third party supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the recognition and response from the Minister and the recognition that the model currently isn't working. In 2022, the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education undertook a sector-wide funding review. The results of this review have still been not released. An updated funding model for post-secondary is absolutely necessary to improve delivery and access to education, and the public has a right to know the findings of this review. Through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Post-Secondary Education, the funding review will provide invaluable, essential information and data. When will this report be released to the public?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The funding review was undertaken last year. It was submitted to my ministry late this summer, and I hope to have my own review of the report in the next little while, and we'll be happy to share it with the public as soon as I've had a chance to take a look at it.
House Leader of the Fourth Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, hardworking taxpayers in Surrey made a clear choice in the last election. Surrey voters voted for Mayor Brenda Locke, and they voted to keep the RCMP in Surrey. Mr. Speaker, this NDP government is now taking an extreme authoritarian approach, using legislation to undermine the City of Surrey's mandate given to them by voters to keep the RCMP in Surrey. When this NDP Premier hears that his heavy-handed, tone-deaf authoritarian approach is going to inevitably cost massive property tax increases for everyday hard-working Surrey's families whose paychecks are already stretched thin by inflation on groceries, by the NDP's punishing carbon tax grab, and by rising mortgage rates, how does it make him feel? Mr. Speaker, the question to this NDP Premier, how does it feel to take money out of the pockets of hard-working families in Surrey?
Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The decision on the issue of the police transition in Surrey relates to the issue of public safety. That is first and foremost, Honourable Speaker. That is why we put the $150 million on the table to deal with costs associated with the transition. That $150 million, the number, was based on numbers supplied to us by the City of Surrey and verified independently that was the $30 million a year. And that's how we came up with the $150 million, to assist the City of Surrey in the cost of that transition.
Fourth Party House Leader Supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, in 2023, Surrey will spend approximately $166 million with the RCMP to serve 630 citizens. That works around 263 per person per capita, while Vancouver will spend approximately $401 million to serve 690,000 people, or around 581 per capita. On a per capita basis, Vancouver's police force costs more than twice as much as Surrey's RCMP force. Mr. Speaker, would this NDP Premier please explain to concerned Surrey families who are already stretched thin by inflation on groceries, on the NDP's punishing carbon tax grab, and by rising mortgage rates, why this NDP government believes everyday, hard-working families in Surrey can afford to pay more on property taxes, or better yet, to all taxpayers of British Columbia, why we can afford to pay more to subsidize the mess that this NDP government has created by upending and ignoring the results of the democratic process of municipal elections in Surrey. Why do they think they know better than the citizens of Surrey?
Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. This has been, since the very beginning, about the issue of public safety, first and foremost, not only for Surrey, but for the rest of the province. The decision was made based on the analysis done by the professionals in my ministry, by working with the RCMP, by information supplied by the City of Surrey, on their ability to transition back. Their plan was found wanting. Since that time, we have had delay after delay after delay by the City of Surrey. The legislation tabled ends that. The decision I made ends that. What the people of Surrey want is a transition to a police force that is going to happen. What may be of interest to the member, because as I said, the $150 million was based on based on numbers supplied to us by the City of Surrey on the differential of $30 million a year, is that the third quarter results for the City of Surrey are now out. And they show that the City of Surrey has underspent their police budget, not even spending what they're supposed to have spent on their police budget. And they're projecting a $44 million surplus, Honourable Speaker. What the City of Surrey needs to do is to get on with the transition, stop wasting taxpayers' money on fighting a decision that has been made and is being confirmed in legislation.
Official Opposition House Leader.
Last night at a meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, the member for Fraser-Nicola moved a motion for the committee to request that the Auditor General undertake, and I quote, an examination of the Government of British Columbia's response and subsequent recovery efforts related to the June 30th, 2021 wildfire that devastated the community of Lytton and immediate surrounding area, with a view to supporting the return to homes and community, end quote. Regrettably, at that meeting last night, the NDP majority on that committee said no. They voted the motion down. They said no to accountability and no to transparency for the suffering people of Lytton. Mr. Speaker, it's been 839 days since the village burned down, and not a single person from the village has moved back home, let alone rebuilt their home or their business. So my question to the Premier is this: will the Premier disavow the heartless decisions of his NDP colleagues and endorse the motion made by the member from Fraser-Nicola to request that the Auditor General conduct a full audit into the rebuilding of Lytton? Surely that's the least that this government can do.
Minister of Emergency Management.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. The devastation in Lytton has been life-changing for many residents, and I know that the recovery can't happen fast enough for people who just want to get back home as soon as they can. So it's understandable that people have questions about the process. Our focus right now needs to be on working together to drive forward the recovery and rebuilding work. The village is leading that work, and we're doing everything we can to support the village so that that work can happen faster. But I also want to emphasize how important the work underway is. The village of Lytton was built on top of a former Indigenous village site and burial ground, and the archaeological findings so far demonstrate a rich history that's been preserved in a way that is found in few other places in the province. Yesterday, the Ent-Makapluk people released a statement yesterday to share more about the story behind the findings, which so far include more than 7,000 artifacts dating back to as much as 7,500 years, as well as multiple ancestral remains.
Thank you. Member for Cariboo North.
Mr. Speaker, people were shocked by a sign in the Cariboo Memorial Hospital declaring the ER closed unless a patient was imminently dying. The NDP tried to deny it, but the truth is out. On that very day, my constituent, Ken Schindel, collapsed in Weems Lake, but because he wasn't imminently dying, his wife Myrtle was told that the ER was closed and he would be diverted to 100 Mile. Ken writes, and I quote, in his words, "I was just watching BCTV News, and the minister was saying that there was no closure Monday night at the Weems Lake ER. Think the boy should check his facts." End quote. Does the Premier believe Cariboo residents like Ken and Myrtle should accept this dangerous NDP's new normal of closed emergency rooms?
Minister of Health. Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker, and there is no accepting of that. In fact, Honourable Speaker, we put in place in September a group of doctors to support emergency rooms across BC. We've made changes through Health Match BC, build a group of nurses who travel to support emergency rooms in BC in specific cases, and that includes in the Cariboo, Honourable Speaker. We're supporting emergency rooms through, for example, transformative APP contracts in communities such as Oliver, such as Merritt, such as Salmon Arm, to support communities in BC. So, Honourable Speaker, I would say we've discussed the issue of the closure of the Williams Lake Hospital emergency room. There was no closure. I'm, of course, Honourable Speaker, interested in hearing concerns raised by constituents, and I'll follow up on this with the honourable member. But Interior Health has been clear. The Williams Lake, the Cariboo Memorial Hospital, has been clear there was no closure. But there are significant issues in Williams Lake. It's why I went to Williams Lake to meet with doctors, to meet with nurses, to meet with healthcare providers, and we're going to continue to work to support these issues.
Member supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP expects Ken and Myrtle to dismiss their own eyes and buy into this hollow NDP promise. Promises contradicted by the signs on the ER declaring they're closed unless you're imminently dying. Ken, having endured this nightmare, warns, and I quote, "If the minister says that the ER wasn't closed, he better check his facts, because Myrtle and I will say the truth," end quote. Why does the Premier expect Ken and Myrtle to trust his government's rhetoric over their first-hand experience with the NDP's new normal of failing health care?
Minister of Health. Honourable Speaker, of course we've checked the facts. And of course, Honourable Speaker, an extraordinary effort, I think, is being made to support, in particular, rural emergency rooms across BC. That means new contract arrangements. That means pools of doctors and nurses supporting communities. That means policies that promote nursing, 40 of them, in the Health Human Resources Plan, Honourable Speaker, that have led in part to a net increase in nurses of 5,221 this year. And this contrasts significantly to the period from 2009 to 2016. 2009 to 2016, when the number of registered nurses in BC actually went down, Honourable Speaker. We're going to continue to make these efforts, and of course I'll follow up with the member's constituent. East River South.
So, under the NDP's new normal, you must be on the brink of death, it appears, to get help. And even in hospitals, nurses are being told to call 911 for their patients. And it's had fatal consequences for people in my riding. Imagine the devastation felt by my constituent Richard, whose wife, who has now sadly passed away, was bleeding from her nose and mouth while inside a Prince George hospital bed, calling for help, and none came, and she was forced to call 911 from her hospital bed inside the hospital. All this, and the health minister calls the crisis just the new normal. So how can the Premier possibly defend this NDP new normal when even patients bleeding and sadly dying in hospital beds are compelled to call 911?
Minister of Health. Honourable Speaker, just because the member opposite represents something that was completely different I said that way doesn't mean I said it, Honourable Speaker, in the way that he's suggesting. It's absolutely not the case. What I have said, and what is true, is that we have in our hospitals today approximately 9,800 on any given day inpatients, people inpatient to the hospital. And this is more than the base bed capacity of the healthcare system and 1,000 more than it had been in previous years. So what have we done? We've added, Honourable Speaker, to the base acute care of the province. We provided a Health Human Resources Plan that is adding doctors and nurses and healthcare workers across the system, Honourable Speaker. We are in fact responding. And in Dawson Creek, where I was there to announce the construction of a new hospital, Honourable Speaker, I met with doctors and community members and nurses to address the specific problems in that community, and will be doing so in Prince George soon. Member for Surrey South.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Under the NDP, high spending equals disastrous results. Day after day, we're hearing tragic stories of the NDP's new normal at overrun Surrey Memorial Hospital. Last month, a man in his 40s in desperate need of mental health services was escorted off the premises. Just minutes later, he jumped in front of a car and died by suicide. This is a crisis that's traumatizing frontline staff. And yet the NDP ignores our private member's bill amending the Mental Health Act that's designed to save lives. And they're utterly failing to fix our overwhelmed hospitals. So how can the Premier continue to tolerate the NDP's new normal that leads to these kind of tragedies and traumatizes frontline healthcare staff?
Minister of Health. Honourable Speaker, in June I spent a couple of days at Surrey Memorial Hospital meeting with healthcare staff, meeting with community members. What resulted in that was 30 specific actions that we're taking to respond to it. 3 months later, I reported on the progress on every single one of those actions, Honourable Speaker. In addition to that, of course, we're building a second hospital in Surrey, which the opposition opposes. We are putting new long-term care beds into Surrey, which the opposition opposes, Honourable Speaker. We are, Honourable Speaker, responding specifically to what we heard from healthcare workers. which means, Honourable Speaker, improved cardiac services, improved renal services, supports in emergency rooms, Honourable Speaker, supports and work with hospitalists to address their contract issues, which were significant at the time. We're going to continue to act on Surrey and lead on Surrey, Honourable Speaker.
Prince George Valemount.
The public deserves answers about why Dr. de Villiers, a man who faced charges of sexual assault and interference against a child and was subsequently convicted, was paid $350,000 in the 2022 fiscal year. This individual was arrested in June 2021, yet amid horrifying charges, he was inexplicably allowed to return to work and to continue to collect his six-figure salary. Even after his arrest, he continued to receive $20,000 in benefits, $24,000 in pension, and $50,000 in vacation pay. No explanation has been given by the NDP government for this outrageous use of public funds. So can the Premier account for this egregious and indefensible use of taxpayer money?
Minister of Health. Honourable Speaker, it's our obligation to follow the law. In this case, Dr. de Villiers was found responsible, was found guilty, and he was immediately fired.
Member supplemental.
He was charged, arrested, convicted, and sentenced. And all the while, he was getting paid a six-figure salary. He stayed on the payroll of Interior Health. Last February, when we raised this issue, the minister dismissed it then. And now we learn that this individual has been paid $325,000 in 22-23, a full year after he was arrested for sexual assault against a child. People struggling in British Columbia watch in disbelief as their hard-earned tax dollars continue to be paid to a child sex offender after he was arrested. So will the Premier take responsibility and provide an explanation for how this possibly could have happened in our province?
Minister of Health. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And like the Honourable Member, I find the actions which have been adjudicated in court and someone found guilty abhorrent, Honourable Speaker. And that is why on the day that Dr. de Villiers was found guilty, he was fired.
The bell ends question period. Minister of Tourism, Arts, Culture and Sport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to present the BC Arts Council Annual Report 2022-2023 and supporting documentation.
Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I call second reading Bill 31, Emergency and Disaster Management Act, and in the Douglas Fir Committee Room, I call the whole of Bill 27, Money Judgment Enforcement Act.
Committee chairs.
All right, members. I believe it's Bill 31, the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, which has been called for second reading debate. Seeing, oh, there you are. Member for Vancouver-Langara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to continue on from my remarks for the time I have remaining, speaking to Bill 31, I wish to just clarify a point that I was making yesterday in the first part of my remarks. I referred to the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, his reversal of position in respect of Métis Nation BC, and I have the letter here with me that I was referring to, and I do see that as I pick this conversation up, Mr. Speaker, with the Minister responsible for Bill 31, that there is some points of clarification in terms of how this government sees the meaning of Indigenous governing body, and I will say that from this letter that it's the government's view that while the province agrees that Métis people in British Columbia have non-site-specific Section 35 rights, our view is that at present, MNBC does not have status or authority as an Indigenous governing body within the meaning of the Declaration Act. In part, this view is informed by our understanding that Section 35 rights are held collectively, and therefore, an Indigenous governing body under the Declaration Act must be authorized by the proper rights-holding collective. So, Mr. Speaker, this gets at my further, I'm only using this as a point of example in terms of understanding what the government's current interpretation and application of Indigenous governing body is under Bill 31. I think that that is important, and certainly I would also say that, of course, presumably the government still sees Métis peoples as being Indigenous peoples in this province, and we know that the subject matter of Bill 31 is not just land-based emergencies. They do refer to as an emergency a transmissible disease. So I know that the member from Caribou-Chilcotin is the lead member responsible for Shadow Minister for this role, will be also probing the nature of the description of, or definition of emergency in our committee review. I wanted to go further, Mr. Speaker. I was talking about some of the important provisions that deal with agreements. And we know that under Part 3, agreements with Indigenous governing bodies includes various forms of agreements: coordination agreements, decision-making agreements, specified coordination agreements, and statutory power agreements. There is a lot here, Mr. Speaker, to review with the Minister, and I will just highlight that there are a number of points here as we look at this that we'll want to pursue at the committee stage. For example, the interplay between this provision and Section 90 and Section 120 of the bill. Section 90 and Section 120 of the bill refer to consultation with Indigenous peoples, and also under 120 it refers to consultation, engagement, and cooperation with Indigenous peoples. The meaning of consultation is going to be important. There are various points under this bill where the Minister must consider comments received or the rights of Indigenous peoples on whose behalf an Indigenous governing body acts. So the words around consider the rights, consider comments, consult, and then consent. These are all important measures and standards for which Indigenous governing bodies must understand and appreciate the context in which this is working. This is something that we will be wanting to probe and also understand in a deeper context as we look at a fairly technical bill, which again, much of the definition and details are being left to regulation. I mentioned yesterday, Mr. Speaker, for example, there's reference here to how under a coordination agreement, it may include one or more of the following parties to the agreement: a local authority, another Indigenous governing body, or a participating authority. So again, the reference to another Indigenous governing body suggests that in respect of the lands for which we're looking at an emergency management system and disaster recovery, that there's another Indigenous governing body that ought to be a party to a coordination agreement. Mr. Speaker, we'll want to have a deeper understanding as to how these types of coordination agreements under Section 34, for example, will be coordinating and involving another Indigenous governing body, and for what purpose, what reason. Presumably, Mr. Speaker, of course, it relates to some of the concerns and considerations around overlapping rights and titles assertion. I'm just going to look for another reference here, Mr. Speaker, which I wanted to give by way of example to the Minister and her team as they prepare and consider the committee review. Under Section 37 of this bill, it refers to Section 37 sub 4 refers to Section 7, 2 to 5 of DRIPA. I'm interested, Mr. Speaker, as we look at statutory power agreements. This is a very important part and provision in DRIPA. As we know, we've seen this government exercise that section of DRIPA in respect of the Tahltan Nation. I know that the government has other agreements that are under negotiation and discussion with First Nations in this province, including, of course, in respect of resource development. But in this context, under emergency management and disaster recovery, I'm curious as to why Section 7 sub 1 of DRIPA is not referred to or incorporated as part of this bill. This is an example as to how this government is interpreting and involving the powers and the provisions, the jurisdiction that's set out under the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, and incorporating that as part of this bill. Because Section 7 sub 1 does refer to that the reference to an exercise of a statutory power of decision must be done jointly by the Indigenous governing body and the government or another decision maker, and the consent of the Indigenous governing body must be sought before the exercise of a statutory power of decision. So this is where the interplay between this bill and DRIPA is going to be important, as I mentioned in my comments to date on this bill. This is a land-based bill for some part, and as we interpret and try and apply the provisions of DRIPA into this land-based bill for some parts of emergency and management, we'll need to understand how that is going to work. Mr. Speaker, as we look at the importance of the understanding, we need to get this right. We need to ensure that Indigenous peoples and First Nation communities are provided with the right authorities and jurisdictions in a transparent, manageable way. We know that as we look at ways in which the federal and provincial governments continue to support and provide self-governance rights to First Nations, as provided under the Constitution and as referred to under the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, the meaning of consent, consultation, and comment is going to be important. Because, Mr. Speaker, we know that under DRIPA, free, prior, and informed consent is an important principle. So understanding how we are working between the jurisdictions of the local authority, government, and Indigenous governing bodies will be important. Understanding how other Indigenous communities that have not yet achieved the standard that this government has set for an Indigenous governing body will be important to understand. Because as we look at recognition by, for example, the Haida Nation through legislation in this House, as we did in the last session in the spring, we need to understand what governance standard the government is applying to Indigenous governing bodies, what demonstration of, in the words of the Minister's letter to Métis Nation BC, is a demonstration of that collective the authorization by the proper rights holding collective. So as we've seen with the Wet'suwet'en peoples, for example, and the nations there involved, there's been an ongoing process to get clarification and validation, evidence of the authorization by the proper rights holding collective. Métis Nation BC doesn't have it, as set out in this letter by the Minister on May 30th. But I do know, as we look at the committee stage, because of the continued advancement in a necessary way with First Nations and our lands, because of the challenges we just heard in respect of emergency recovery in Lytton, that the Minister of Emergency Management responded to, issues around transparency for communities, including for those residents in Lytton who've been waiting over 849 days for that recovery. We need to have a situation where we're not pitting local communities against First Nations. For a minister in this government to stand up, I appreciate the respect, the understanding of those heritage sites and the ancestral lands and what's been found, and certainly the nation that has disclosed their findings. But we have to have both an emergency management system and a recovery system, of course, that doesn't cause more strain between our relationships with First Nations and Indigenous communities. And so when our House Leader asked a question on behalf of the member from Fraser-Nicola, as she sought transparency in a motion moved at public accounts yesterday in committee, we're asking on behalf of all British Columbians for the transparency that's necessary, because residents and the community have been waiting 849 days. And it concerns me that we are pitting these communities against each other, arguably, because there's a lack of transparency and understanding. I don't see how a minister of this government can stand up in response to a meaningful and responsible question around accountability and transparency and say in the course of this emergency management legislation that we're not going to provide for that level of accountability and transparency. People are waiting for 849 days plus, and they don't have the answers from this government. We understand the importance, as the minister said, of the need to move with urgency. That is what the member from Fraser-Nicola and other members from our official opposition caucus have been asking for days, for weeks, for months, in this chamber and out in the community. And at this juncture, as we're looking at major change for how we deal with emergency management recovery in this province, and we can't have a simple answer to transparency and accountability at this juncture, because in the context of delay of 849 days, we should at least have that. And I would hope that the minister will answer directly these questions as the member from Caribou-Chilcotin, myself, and other members of our official opposition caucus ask those questions, because we need to ensure that even under this bill, we have a framework for transparency and accountability as to how local authorities are working with government, are working with Indigenous governing bodies to deal with both emergency management and disaster recovery. Because it didn't happen in Lytton. And I believe, in the answer that I heard today in question period, that it is not satisfactory. It's not satisfactory in the sense that this government has to play the role for everyone. We understand, again, and I certainly understand, the respect that's necessary for the findings of the local nations there. I understand that. But we have not seen the level of understanding for the local community, because they're still waiting. Those people who lost their homes are still waiting. And so government should never use, and this is my concern, government should never pit and use First Nations as a shield. I say that with utmost respect. Because as we look at the nature of the combined jurisdictions of local authorities, government, and First Nations as incorporated in this Bill 31, I hope that I do not continue to hear from this government answers like that. Again, I acknowledge the importance of the response, but the importance of the response was to a question around transparency and accountability. And I hope that as we look at Bill 31 in the context of this committee review, that we understand the mechanisms, the administrative burdens, the amounts of reports that need to be filed and administered and provided by First Nations and Indigenous governing bodies that have not been provided the resources and the capacity funding in order to work through the complex nature of this legislative framework. These, Mr. Speaker, are the important questions we need to be asking, because what has led to 849 days of delay with Lytton? Where has been the support of this government to help First Nations and the Indigenous communities to get through what they need to deal with in response to recovering the Lytton community, including for the local nations? We've seen some latitude and progress made with the federal government, but where has this provincial government been? So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to again join my member from Caribou-Chilcotin. I look forward to the committee review. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Fraser-Nicola.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank my colleague for his comments and for his overview of exactly how complex this issue is. The importance of Bill 31 cannot be overstated for people in my riding. And when I look at the explanatory note that says that the purposes of this bill are to account for all 4 phases of emergency management, which are mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery, to streamline and clarify the powers and duties of the Minister, Provincial Emergency Management Organization, ministries, public sector agencies, and local authorities, to facilitate agreements, consultation, and cooperation with Indigenous peoples with respect to emergency management, to clarify the roles of critical infrastructure owners, to incorporate into legislation lessons learned in recent years in responding to floods, wildfires, and the COVID-19 pandemic, and to modernize and improve consistency of language in the legislation. And I think as you listen to the response from the opposition in regards to the bill that's on the floor, there are just so many factors to be taken into consideration. And this bill is so incredibly important to everyone who has been affected by an evacuation alert, by the loss of property, by the loss of their home, by in a motel room for over 800 days, displacement, 2 years of COVID, and 2 years of no home. This bill is so much more than words. It is how we respond with empathy and with understanding and with transparency and with clarity, and give people the trust that they need to have that we do actually have their backs, that we have systems in place, that we're willing to ask the difficult questions, because we're their voice. We are the people who make the rules. And I can tell you that we have a lot of work to do. I want to start by thanking everyone who has worked on this bill. I know that since being an MLA since 2013, I don't think there's been a year that my constituency has, or my riding has not had some sort of an emergency. And it is incredible, the people who work on the front lines, the volunteers who register people, the volunteers who look after all the animals affected, you know, the dogs, the cats, the gerbils, the whatever people have as pets in their homes, and find difficulty as they evacuate. I remember being in Kamloops during the Elephant Hill fire, and it was just absolutely incredible to see the groups that were there to help out. And I feel an obligation as an MLA in this House that we ensure that this bill answers and fills the gaps that we've seen. And with 209 clauses, I expect that, and my people in my riding have high expectations, that 209 clauses will address those weaknesses in the system which have put up barriers for those affected by disasters. Any MLA who has had a disaster in their riding, I mean, one of the first places you visit is the ESS and the emergency office, or the emergency center, set up to welcome people who have left home with hopefully a packed bag and their medications and what they need for the first 3 days at least for evacuation. But never in my mind did it enter my mind that in November, after an atmospheric river, my people would find themselves in the cold weather, sleeping in a car, because we weren't prepared. Never in my mind did I think that people would have to fight so hard when they are strapped for dollars to get a reimbursement for a hotel. Never in my mind would I think that in 2013 Elephant Hill fire, when we went to the ministry and said, the voucher system isn't working, 2013, 2023, we're doing the same thing. Still giving one voucher and you must spend it all. And you're in a hotel room, hopefully with a hotel fridge. Where do you put all those groceries that you're forced to buy? I recall being in a grocery store and having the person with the voucher being absolutely amazed that the rules were you had to spend every cent of it one shot. So she turned around to the person in the line behind her and said, "Can I please buy your groceries?" Now, that is generous, but that tells me our system isn't working. I want to talk a little bit about Fraser-Nicola. For those of you who haven't visited, many have. Many drive through. We start south of Hope, and we go up the Fraser Canyon all the way to north of 70 Mile, over to Goldbridge and Braylorn outside of Lillooet, and east to just outside of Kamloops, over to Merritt, down the Coquihalla Highway, and all the way down Highway 3 to the US border. So we are a huge riding. We've got lots of land, we've got lots of farming. We depend on forestry. We have resource industries like mining. Tech is located in my riding. We have generational farms and ranches. We have generational forestry workers. And it breaks their heart to see what we're doing right now in regards to wildfires. When we decide that structures and people are the only thing we're going to protect, it says something to the people who work on the land. 2 years after the Elephant Hill fire, I held a roundtable for the farmers and ranchers in the Clinton 70 Mile Loon Lake area. And pulled them together because we were coming up to a timeline where, you know, if you don't apply for the funding or the support by this date, you're not going to get it. And we wanted to see how they were doing. And there sat someone who was probably third generation on their ranch. And he stood up and he said, you know, I can't bring myself to apply for one more grant. I am a proud person who is used to looking after myself and my family. And here I am, and I can't tell you what it feels like when I get a response that says you didn't fill it in properly, or no, you don't qualify for this grant. He said, quite honestly, my wife and I just can't do it one more time. He said, the wildfire came through our area. They saved my house. He said, my house is insured. They burned my fields, burned my fences. My cattle popped like popcorn. But they saved my house. He said, I sit and I live in black. No trees, no fields, no cattle, can't sell the ranch, and that's what I've got left. And you look and you think, I want to look at this bill and see if it will make a difference for those people that feel left behind. I'll talk about the people at Pressy Lake. Pressy Lake was one of my first experiences. Didn't even know where it was. And it's outside of 70 Mile. Wildfire crew came in, knocked on the doors because evacuation was on alert and probably going to full evacuation. And they actually asked the locals where to put the pumps in the lake and where it would be appropriate to put sprinklers on their homes. People felt that someone cared. They truly did, and they packed their bags, and in good faith, they left their community. They were guaranteed, or felt they were guaranteed by the words of the firefighters. We're here, we've got your back. Imagine their surprise when they came home to a community burned to the ground. No hoses, no pumps, no sprinklers, no idea what happened while they were away. No eyes on their community is what they felt. And how do you get information? How do you find out what happened when the only people there are people who told you that the sprinklers, the pumps, the hoses would be there to protect your homes or your cabins? And out of the words of one of the workers, it was, we've never lost a structure. Well, Pressy Lake became a voice for what is wrong with what we're doing. Pressy Lake is one of those voices that makes situations like the shoe swap this year happen. Because the public is slowly losing faith and losing trust in our systems. And in this bill, I certainly hope that we're going to address the lack of trust from the public. And not just trust us, I'm from government, I'm here to help, but actually building the trust that is needed in order to keep our people safe. Not just the public, but our frontline people. Fraser-Nicola has been the epicenter of climate disasters over the last 7 years. It's not a title that I'm proud of, but it is a reality that I live every day. We were hit in 2021 with the atmospheric river, with Highway 1, Highway 3, Highway 5, Highway 8, and the Duffy Lake Road all going out. And we lost lives. During the atmospheric river, we had incredible, heroic things happen, like the community of hope that looked after all the people that had no place or no way to get out. Freshet flooding year after year in many areas, but particularly in the community of Cache Creek. Wildfires every year affecting the villages of Ashcroft, Cache Creek, Clinton, Spence's Bridge, Lytton, Lillooet, Goldbridge, Gun Lake, Downton Lake, Logan Lake, Skeecheson, Merritt, Shacken, New Anch, Cooks Ferry, and all points in between. And the sad thing is, I often think about that rancher's words about living in black as you drive through and see the new scars that are left behind by the wildfires. And out of the wildfires, of course, comes landslides. My people on Highway 8 who were hit first by the wildfire in 2021 that burned all the way from Lytton, up the Fraser Canyon, up the Thompson Valley, up the Nicola Valley. They evacuated cattle to Vanderhoof, finally got their cattle home, and they experienced the atmospheric river on the Nicola River. These are ranchers who make their living farming and growing hay and feeding the province. Hit by wildfire, hardly got home, hit by the atmospheric river. By that time, a number of them said, I'm not leaving. I don't care what government says, I'm not leaving. Because you know what? I don't believe they've got my back. And then after the atmospheric river, where the Nicola River took acres of property, and what it didn't take, it just put mud and debris all over the fields that were beside the river. I have people in Spence's Bridge who actually lost not only their house to the river, but they lost all the land they owned. I mean, how do you tax them? There's nothing left. And those are the people that feel and wonder why they have to fight so hard for support. We need a system that works for the people. When there's a disaster, an emergency, people aren't thinking about how they can get everything and as much as they can from the government. They're thinking about surviving. And our systems, and my experience of being their MLA, our systems aren't working for them. And these are good people. We've had landslides all over the riding due to wildfire damage. And often a landslide which comes after is not eligible for funding assistance. My ranchers on Highway 8 went through the wildfire, went through the atmospheric river, and then they had a landslide. You put your hands up in the air and you think, oh my God, what more can I take? It's very, it's disheartening when you've faced so many challenges and every time you think that government's going to support you, you end up fighting for it. One of my communities that has been severely affected by flooding is the small community of Cache Creek. Many people will have driven through it, maybe 1,100 people, small place. It's got a trickle of a creek that comes through Cache Creek and joins the Bonaparte River. But every spring, that trickle becomes a torrent. And I can't tell you how many times that Cache Creek has come down, taken out the culvert or come over the culvert, run through the fire hall. They open the doors on both sides, and away goes the water. And how many times, because of the rules we have on recovery, that you have to fix what you had. Well, quite obviously, second, third, fourth, fifth time it happens, putting back what we had before isn't working. We need to have the ability to take a look at what needs to be done to mitigate flooding in the future. We need to do more than talk about it. Plus, the village of Cache Creek is expected to put up 20% of the recovery cost. Now, you think about a tax base of 1,100 people. They don't have the money to do that. They need a plan and they need government to be serious about mitigation, to say we have an opportunity here in this season of flooding to actually do what's right. Maybe to take the culvert out and build a bridge. Maybe to ensure that the highway, which is a government infrastructure, the highway needs a bridge, not a culvert. And Cache Creek is one of those examples that we need to learn from, and we need to quit doing what we've always done just because it's the rules. We need to change the rules. City of Merritt, atmospheric river, 2021, 11 o'clock at night. Mass evacuation of the full city due to infrastructure, flooding and infrastructure damage. People on the ground did the best they could given the situation, but it was clear that the system was not ready and not prepared. Many of the evacuees had less than a pleasant experience, and that was in November. November's cold, it's winter. People slept in their cars. Many found they had to return to the evacuation or to the ESS numerous times. It's a story told over and over in the Ombudsman's report. Those are my people. Those are people across this province who have been through one of the toughest things they will ever go through. And we were not ready. We must do better. And my question is, does Bill 31 address the challenges of ESS? The other question I have as we look at disasters like November, our volunteers had worked all summer. They were tired. When we look at the ESS system, we really have to think about that, because they're the front line talking to people who are anxious, who are angry, who are scared, who don't know where they're going. And we need to support those people in those centers. In Merritt, flood recovery was assisted by some incredible groups like Samaritan's Purse, Salvation Army, Rotary, and so many others. But we were working against Mother Nature, trying to clean up flood debris, empty basements of muck and debris, and could feel the winter weather every step of the way. Many homes froze before they raced against time. So in situations like this, decisions must be swift and timely. Does Bill 31 recognize this and enable it, is my question. Wildfires. 2017 wildfire season started with the Elephant Hill fire. Burned up the hill just south of Ashcroft, burned through the Ashcroft Indian Reserve, taking out 13 homes, giving people just minutes to leave their houses. Continued down Highway 1 towards Cache Creek, taking out a dairy barn and burning through the Boston Flats Trailer Court. One of the lessons learned there was there was only one escape route, and thank God people got out. But we need to ensure, as we look at how we deal with emergencies, that we have the appropriate escape routes. The Elephant Hill fire continued to Loon Lake, Clinton, Green Lake, and Pressy Lake. The provinces called in the armed forces. People experienced a difference for the first time between evacuation and evacuation alert in my area. So many experiences from these early fires explain how we got to some of the situations experienced in the most recent fires. I've talked about Pressy Lake, and I haven't talked about the power of social media during emergencies. Because even if government doesn't share information, communities do, people do. They tell of their experiences. And so many of their experiences are challenging. And what it does is it undermines the trust that people have in the services that we provide. June 30th, Lytton. Everyone in this House should be able to talk about Lytton for the number of times I've been in this House to beg for help. And Lytton finds itself today, new information from the minister. So what's the plan? Is the question. As my colleague said, in regards to respect for the process for First Nations. But we also need to have a plan from government. We need the leadership that has been the huge gap in the 2 years and 4 months since Lytton burned down. Government has a huge role to play here. And I am absolutely hopeful that this bill will fill some of those gaps. Because if the story of Lytton is the story of West Bank and the story of Monty Lake and the story of any place that has been burned, we are in trouble. We must learn from what has happened in Lytton. And my motion last night at the Public Accounts Committee came out of the fact that I can't get information. My public is demanding it. They deserve it. And all the talk about partnerships, transparency, we've got your back. You need to show us, not talk about it. So Fraser-Nicola continues to do its best to recover. We are pleased with the fact that after a very, very long wait, there is legislation on the floor of this House. But I urge government to learn from Lytton, to learn from all of our experiences. Because if you're not transparent, if you don't share information, there are others who will fill in that gap. And that may not be the information you want. So I urge you to be transparent, to release reports, to build the trust that our people on the front line deserve. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I am pleased to rise and participate in a debate on Bill 31. Before I offer my observations of this legislation, I want to acknowledge and thank from the bottom of my heart the tireless efforts of the member from Fraser-Nicola, who I think embodies what being that local constituency-focused MLA is all about. It's about showing up for your communities. It's about standing up for your communities. It's about fighting for your communities. I can't think of many other parts of the province. Certainly we've been hit hard in the Caribou and the Thompson and the Kootenays and the north. Wildfire, droughts, floods are more prevalent and more severe everywhere, but I cannot think of anywhere in this province that has been hit harder on an ongoing basis than Fraser-Nicola. When you think of the fires that have ravaged communities, Elephant Hill, you think of obviously Lytton that the member spoke about, you think of all of the flooding events that have impacted that riding, whether it be Cache Creek, which seems to be almost an annual reality for the people in that community, all of the flooding that wiped out so many bridges and such critical infrastructure on the Coquihalla Highway, the rural side roads that have been washed out on a routine basis, and of course drought, which is layered on top of all of the above. The only thing I think that has enabled folks in Fraser-Nicola, which really embody the spirit of, I think, British Columbians, is to move forward is because of the resilience of the people who live there, the resilience of the communities that are located there, and I think the resilience and the hard work, the dedication, the passion of the member for Fraser-Nicola. So I find her words and the heart that she showed always in this place and outside this place. It's a tough act to follow, but I will do my best. And as I said, these natural disasters, these climate events are becoming more prevalent, and the severity is increasing. The economic toll that these events are taking in our communities is staggering. And just when we think in a wildfire season, for example, when we think that we've set like it can't get any worse, It can't, the season can't get any start earlier and end longer and ravage so much economically viable timber, ravage communities and infrastructure. Just when we think it can't possibly get any worse, the next season arrives and we seem to set all kinds of new records that none of us are excited to highlight and champion. But the reality is these types of natural disasters and these wildfires, these flooding events, these drought conditions are here. And they're going to be here, and they're going to likely continue to get worse. And so it requires a modernization of our approach, a modernization of how we ready for these events, how we prepare British Columbians and communities and infrastructure, how we mitigate the impacts of these events, how we fight them when they're happening. In the case of wildfires, how we better mobilize the resources to attack wildfires earlier and harder. How we actually help British Columbians who are impacted by these events while the events are unfolding, ensuring that the emergency services and the supports that people need are actually there when they need it. And of course, how do we better help British Columbians recover from these natural disasters? We will have a lot of questions as the official opposition about this legislation once we get to the committee stage. And I actually think there have been some very worthy presentations in second reading from all sides of the House on this bill to this point. I think certainly those of us that represent areas in rural parts of the province, whether it be in the Caribou or the Kootenays, even West Kelowna, which is right on the edge of a major interface. I think the observations that I certainly have heard in the time that there has been debate on this bill has really highlighted a range of common themes. And what I hope to canvass somewhat in my remarks is, okay, I think we generally all are saying the same thing. We're all acknowledging the same challenges. Does this legislation actually address in a meaningful and focused and frankly adequate manner those particular challenges? So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I will reserve my right to continue my comments at a later date. Now adjourn. Sorry, the House do now adjourn debate. I'll sit again. I move adjournment of the debate and ask that the House to sit again.
Yeah. Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Government House Leader. Sorry, Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Section A reports progress on Bill 27 and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader?
Next sitting, Speaker.
So ordered. Government House Leader.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Members, you heard the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 p.m.